The 2023 Volkswagen Atlas, and because this is Savage Geese, we are absolutely the last people on planet Earth to do a video on this thing. But before Volkswagen refreshes this in the 2024 model year, they send this generation of Atlas upstate to play on a farm, we decided to visit this thing and explore why this has been such a sales success for Volkswagen here in the United States. It's about $44,000 to $45,000, which makes it a relative bargain. The SE trim level is somewhere in the middle, so it has many of the niceties you were expecting, like a wireless charging pad, wireless Apple CarPlay, heated seats, a leather interior, a power rear tailgate, and some other premium features. It doesn't break the bank. And from an interior perspective, that's really why you're buying this vehicle. It is very large. With all of the seats folded flat, you're looking at almost 97 cubic feet of cargo capacity, which means this thing is enormous. When it comes to the rear passengers as well, it's a very well-packaged vehicle. Really, the reason you're buying something like this, hopefully, is to carry as many things as possible and your spawn/family. This is a good kid hauler. The second row in this SE trim level is a bench seat. The seat behind the driver's side can adjust independently of the seat behind the passenger. They work on all physical controls, so this can slide forward, it can be pushed forward to get into the third row, it can tilt in the back, and all of the rear occupants have charging ports. They are USB-C chargers in this vehicle. The third row, assuming you've positioned the middle row or second row in a advantageous position for someone with longer legs, can fit full-size adults. I can get behind myself in the second row in this vehicle and fit relatively comfortably. The nice thing about this vehicle as well is all of the hard plastics, while they definitely don't make this feel particularly premium, it does allow this thing to be cleaned easier and potentially hold up to the abuse that pets and kids are going to put on this thing. It also has good vents in the third row, so if you are going to carry dogs, someone like Deb from Andy Lab uses one of these vehicles to transport her two pooches. It does a good job keeping them cool. When it comes to the front seats of this vehicle, it is typical Volkswagen Group, which means there's excellent storage in the doors. It fits a full-size Yeti bottle. You have a very low belt line, which means you have excellent visibility all the way around this car. And you have the prior generation of Volkswagen controls and infotainment, which means this car has not been ruined by their push for all haptic everything. You have physical, simplistic HVAC controls. You have their last generation head unit, which uses a mix of touch and physical control knobs. And it has wireless Apple CarPlay, which works quite well. The controls on the steering wheel are easy to use, and they feel actually somewhat expensive. There's a good clickiness and tactile feedback to them. And the all-digital gauge cluster has good information and is easy to use. Past that, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the storage for the center armrest. It is absolutely enormous. You can fit basically a small person there. So with all that said, I think it's time for us to head into the shop. In the shop with the VW Atlas. So what do you need to know? Well, first off is price. This thing starts at about $35,000 in 4-cylinder front-wheel drive, guys. The version we're testing in this video is an SE in front-wheel drive with a VR6 engine that is in the low 40s. And when you fully equip one of these things with all-wheel drive and every package in the VR6, you're looking at in the $50,000 range, which makes this basically priced with everything else in the segment. And this segment is absolutely enormous. Technically, this is built on Volkswagen's modular front-wheel drive architecture known as MQB. This is the prior generation of MQB, as this has already been refreshed. I can imagine the next Atlas will be on the new platform with the aluminum front subframe and all the other fun stuff. This is the biggest vehicle currently in MQB. It's over 200 inches long. They've done their best to utilize this architecture, particularly for the rear. As I talked about in the interior segment, you have essentially a flat floor, the seats have a lot of configurability, and the rear doors open at essentially 90 degrees. This is a very good hauler for things and people. This car comes with 4 different drivetrain setups. You can either get this as all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive, and with or without a 4-cylinder or a VR6. The 4-cylinder is Volkswagen's EA888. It's a 2-liter direct-injected turbocharged 4-cylinder. It makes torque down low. It's very refined. It's refined because it's a basically corporate engine that's in Audi, Porsche, and Volkswagen products. And it doesn't tow that much in the Atlas. It tows like 2,000 pounds with an aftermarket tow hitch. If you get the VR6, you can tow up to 5,000 pounds. And that's because every single VR6 comes with a factory-equipped hatch. returns worse fuel economy, but due to the VR6 signature sound, which is this warm warble, it does sound very, very good. It's unique in this segment. It kind of reminds me of the J-series induction noise found in the prior generation Pilot, which is a good thing. It makes you want to accelerate hard in this thing. There's one gearbox, and that is an 8-speed automatic, at least here in the United States. When it comes to the all-wheel drive setup, it is their 4Motion layout. It's essentially a Haldex. It's front-wheel drive till it needs to send power to the rear, where it sends power to the rear through a pump, and will send up to 50% of the torque. It does not torque vector, but it should get you in and out of bad weather with relative ease. The one thing I will bring up before we take this for a drive, I'm going to be referencing both the 4-cylinder, all-wheel drive, and front-wheel drive equipped vehicles during our drive segment, because I've driven all of them. I've driven this as a rental. I've driven this numerous times as service loaners because I'm very familiar with my VW service department, as I used to own a GTI that was broken all the time. But that said, let's go take this for a quick drive. Setting off for a quick drive in the Volkswagen Atlas, and sadly Mark will not be joining me as he is at the Chicago Museum of Ice Cream. That is no joke. Listen to that VR6. And from a driving perspective, that's honestly the biggest highlight of this vehicle is the VR6. It has unique warm resonance to it. It has some great induction noise. It reminds me a little bit of the J-series found in the old Honda Pilot. And it adds something to an otherwise mostly vanilla driving experience. So let's talk about the pros first. The 8-speed automatic. It is very, very soft. And I mean that in a good way. Honestly, in a mass transportation pod like this is, or just a transportation pod, you don't really need a gearbox to feel ultra sharp and crisp. What you were probably looking for is a gearbox that doesn't interrupt your driving experience, something you never think about, and that's what this does. You don't feel any of the gear shock, no weird gear shifts. It's seamless. The other pro of this vehicle is how quiet it is. When you're on the road, particularly for this class of non-luxury 3-row SUV, it's a remarkably quiet space. You can hear yourself think. If you need to yell at your little bastards in the back seat, you can do that. They can hear your booming voice if you need to get loud. And it doesn't fatigue you on long drives. Mark and I have actually driven other Atlases in the past, and that's something we both talked about. The other pro of the Atlas, particularly compared to something like a Toyota Highlander and some of the other, let's call it more mass market 3-row SUVs, is the all-wheel drive system. This 4Motion system does a good job at feeling mostly natural. Yes, it's essentially an on-demand system that only sends 50% of the available torque in the rear, and it's doing it when it detects slip, and it'll essentially torque vector front and back accordingly, but it does a good job. It feels more natural and organic than something like the Highlander's all-wheel drive system and their hybrid trim levels. I imagine if you got the A888 as well, if you got one of the 4-cylinder variants of this, that engine is very refined. You've seen or felt it in basically every other Volkswagen Group product. As I talked about in the shop segment, one of the benefits of that engine is it has to serve a very broad bandwidth of products. It has to fit both in mass market vehicles like this and some more luxury products like the Porsche Macan and Audi Q5. So it has some extra refinement baked into it, and it makes its way, I imagine, in this Atlas as well. What are the cons? Well, it's a fairly uninspiring driving vehicle, and I imagine when this first came out in 2018, most of its competitors were the same way. But now the segment is incredibly tough. And if you really think about where it stands, right, it doesn't get the fuel economy of the Toyota Highlander. And when you start to push this thing and you try to drive with any sort of gusto, it's this big, floaty barge, essentially. It doesn't have the body control or the torque vectoring diff of something like the all-new Honda Pilot. And the steering, particularly in this SE model without all of its drive modes, is essentially lifeless. It is incredibly soft, which means you could essentially drive this with 2 broken arms, but it has zero connection to what the front of the vehicle is doing. And you combine that with a really soft, floaty suspension with limited body control, it feels just largely disconnected as I'm tossing this thing back and forth. But if you don't care about any of that, it's a soft vehicle, it's a quiet vehicle, and the V6 does give it a little bit of a special feeling when you're driving this thing. Past that though, I think it's time for us to head in the final thoughts and wrap this video up. Final thoughts on the VW Atlas. This is a very tough segment. Nearly every manufacturer builds a front-wheel drive, 3-row SUV at this point. And the competition is very, very tough. The new Honda Pilot is excellent. The CX90, which I haven't driven yet, I imagine is very good, being a double wishbone, rear-wheel drive, inline-6, which at its price is unbeatable. That said, there are some perks of the VW Atlas. It is very cheap. If you got one of these things in the low to mid 40s, it's a bargain. The VR6 sounds unique and has a lot of character, and the interior space is very, very usable. It finds itself sort of in the middle ground between dynamic SUVs like the Pilot and I imagine the CX90, and total appliances like the Toyota Highlander. That said, things like the Toyota Highlander with the hybrid drivetrain setup are bomb-proof, reliable, and get tremendous fuel economy. This does not. So again, it's sort of that middle ground product. But if you like what the interior has to offer, and I've talked to people like Deb from Andy the Lab, who said the interior offered exactly what they wanted for their dog carrying needs, particularly in the third row with powerful AC vents and an interior that's very easy to clean, you might find this vehicle well suited for your needs. With that, thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon.